Anyone who knows my work knows that I like a bit of splatter. Is it splatter or spatter? Or blots or splodges? I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? They can be really useful in a painting. Used wrongly, they can make your painting look like it's got a nasty case of chicken pox. So what I want to do is go through when you should use them and when you shouldn't, how to get them, and how to stop them going where you don't want them. My name's Liz Chadderton. I'm a professional watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I bring you a tip, trick or technique that I wish someone had told me when I started painting. And this week it's all about splatters. So I see a lot of people get towards the end of a painting and say things like, oh, do you think it needs a bit of splatter? Or they use splatter when they're not sure what else to do, or if there's an area that's a bit overworked and they think, oh, perhaps I can disguise that. So I thought it'd be worth thinking what splatter can do for you and why it's a good reason to use it and why it isn't. So sometimes you just want some markings. So this is a horse with flea-bitten markings, and therefore splatter made sense. Equally, if I just move it so you can see, there was an area that was just a bit boring and needed breaking up, and I used some white to break up that area. I spattered with white. Spatter can be good for disguising things. So this is a pen and wash owl, obviously. And if you're doing pen and wash, sometimes you will drop, especially if you're using a dip pen, you will do a blotch of ink, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you dab at it, you'll just smudge it. So one spot will look like a mistake, but if you put other spots round, then it will look far more intentional. And threes are great, triangles are lovely for moving your eye round a composition. Other thing to think about is they can be really good for breaking up a line that's maybe a bit hard. And also you can do soft splatters, so wet paper, drop in splatters to get soft ones to contrast nicely with hard ones. We look at this, this is for a class I'm doing online, a free class on the 29th of April, so if you're interested in that, just message me and I'll tell you. So I've used lots of splatters because I wanted the exuberance of all that blossom and the idea of the pollen sort of floating off. So spatters can be really nice for that. Spatters can be very useful for balancing up a composition. It's a bit big for the camera, so I will move it. So this lizard, I really like the arms sort of hanging down over the wall where it was, but it was too narrow. So I've used very large spatters to extend the reach and balance up the composition. And you can alter the size of the spatters and the placement to do that, and that's good. Also, spatters can be very good if things are quite tight in places and you want an abstract element. It can add an extra level of interest. It'll be very good for movement. So if we look at this Canada goose, a few spatters just gives a feeling of movement and air under those wings. Let's have a little look at this donkey. Let's move it so you can see it all. I've used spatters around this ear to give the feeling that it's kind of twitching. So all those are really legitimate uses of spatters, whereas disguising something that's gone wrong or doing it because you can't think what else to do, I would say is not a good idea. Having said when I wouldn't use splatters and when I would, how on earth are we going to do them? And I think there are three main ways. Just use a brush. Use a toothbrush, use a syringe or a dropper. So if we start, and I usually use a brush, so let's start with a brush. We've got some quite liquid paint, maybe add a little bit more water to that. Load our brush up, and then I just tap it over my finger. Some people sort of do that, and that's a bit more splatty. I just find you get nicer rounder marks by tapping it. If you get rid of some of the paint so there's not much left and tap it, you tend to get finer marks. If it's really loaded, you tend to get bigger ones. Of course, if you use a bigger brush, you tend to get bigger marks, fairly logically. Some people also flick it. I don't find that particularly helps, and you just get mucky. The other way of using that big brush, or a brush, let's use a different colour for a bit of joy. I've got a lovely pink here, is do a more vertical, so that sort of action, and you will get more lines. You tend to get a line of spots. If you do downwards, you tend to get a more random approach if you tap. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to place things absolutely where you want them, but make it look random. Old toothbrush is another favourite way. And you load it up, and you can either have it downwards or upwards, and you just run your thumb along. Now that immediately shows you the problem. I've got this lovely, very, very fine spatter, and then I've got dribbles coming off. So I don't find a toothbrush terribly useful, and obviously get pretty mucky in the process. I have no issue with being mucky, but just need to warn you. And then the third way, and I do like this, so let's mix up another colour, is to use a syringe. I've got a few syringes, not because I have any nasty habits, but left over from when our chickens needed antibiotics, and the vet gave us millions of them. So you might have syringes, you might have little dropper bottles that came with ink or things like that. So you fill up your syringe, and then you can just do a drop at a time. Lovely. So I want to drop there, that's where I got it. If I do it from higher, you'll get a bigger splattier drop, if that makes sense. You can just flick it as well and get a few little ones, but I very often use a syringe if I want to place a big dot in exactly the spot I want it. It will look random, but I wanted it to go there. That was onto dry paper, but as you saw when we were looking at examples, you could do splats into wet paper for a totally different look. So I'm just going to wet the paper with clean water and let that sink in for a few seconds. The wetter it is, the further the splats will travel. The drier it is, more they will stay where you want them to be. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? Those lovely soft splats, and they move and just make little marks. So pretty. And of course I could let this dry and then do hard splatters on top. So I'll hold that. And so do fine splatters into wet is rather nice too. And then finally, if I use my syringe, and again a big splatter but with a very soft edge, and it keeps on moving. Now if I wait for about a minute, and I won't make you wait, I'll cut this bit out. Let's show you. Of course it doesn't spread quite as far. Let's do a little. So things, as it dries, they won't spread quite as far, and you can manage your splatters in that way. So we've seen different ways of getting the splatters, but what happens if, say, you only want splatters in that circle? Well, the kind of obvious way is to make a mask, and now I can splatter to my heart's content. and they will only go where I want them. But one of the good ways of doing it is actually to wet with clean water. Probably should have a larger brush than this. And I can now splatter. If the splatters go into the wet area, I can fade them away and use it as background, or then mop it up. And this was, I think it was phthalo turquoise, which is a really staining colour, but I've managed to get rid of the splatters that were around the object. So that is a great way of stopping splatters. Say you were doing quite a complicated shape and you want splatters right to the edge, masking it off with a bit of kitchen towel isn't really going to work, but that water is a great trick. Of course, the other thing you could do is just drop in clean water and then only add colour to the splatters that you're happy with their placement. Say you accidentally put a splatter here, well, you just ignore it. You only have splatters where you want them. So I want to keep that one. I could add paint to that one. I want to keep that one. I want to keep that one and that one, but I don't want to keep that one. That one will go away. So there are 3 ways there of controlling your splatters. Let me show you one other thing that's quite fun to do. So say, I want to do big splatters. That's great. You could always do multicoloured splatters. So you could drop in some colour and have 2 colour splatters. So let's just mix in some colour there. Oh, that didn't go in. And then you can end up with 2-tone splatters. Just let it dry and you'll be good to go. If you have big fat splatters and they're too dark, what you can do is twist up a bit of kitchen towel and sort of wick away the liquid, and that'll take some of the pigment off. If you dab at it with your kitchen towel, there's a danger that you'll smudge the outline, but just twisting that and then wicking away the liquid will help them dry quicker, and you take away a little bit of that pigment. If you found that useful, we know when to use splatters, when not to use splatters, how to get them and how to stop them going everywhere. Have fun and don't give your paintings chicken pox.